Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
And I'm Sonia Strimban.
And we are discussing The Serpent's Egg.
Die Spree, die fließt noch immer mit Frankreich und Berlin und wird so täglich schlimmer, wir gehen wir wieder hin.
It's funny seeing everything from the side like this. I seem to recognize you. Did we smoke our first cigarette together? No? But if I say Amalfi, a summer day, 26 years ago. Our parents had cottages next door to each other. You had an elder sister called, let me see, Rebecca. Well?
Do you mind letting me by? I'm in a hurry.
Why, of course. Abel Rosenberg.
The Serpent's Egg is an unusual film made under some very unusual circumstances. Ingmar Bergman made this his first film outside of Sweden, and that's because he was fleeing tax authorities. When Bergman left Sweden, he had considered a few different places to live, including Paris. He settled on Germany, where he shot this film at the famed Bavaria Film Studios, partly financed by the producer Dino De Laurentiis, who's known for making various popular Hollywood films. And this, while not a Hollywood production, is very much a big studio picture. It was shot on back lots and on sets that were created specifically for this movie. If I could say that Bergman ever went all out on a production, I think The Serpent's Egg is that film.
And for me, it was excessive. I actually don't enjoy Bergman films like this, where there is so much production, where there is the Hollywood influence and the imported actors like David Carradine. It's the same reason why I didn't particularly enjoy the movie Shame. It just didn't feel like a Bergman film to me.
What I think is interesting, though, is that Bergman seemed to sense that there were some problems with The Serpent's Egg before it even got into production. I mean, just stopping to consider David Carradine, who was the fifth choice that they wanted for this main role. Mm-hmm. He's playing a Jewish man. David Carradine is not your first pick to play a Jewish man, I would imagine. So there's a lot of things that really disconnected. Putting Bergman on a backlot, for me, it's everything that Bergman is not about. But here we were, filming this big-budget production with David Carradine as a Jewish man, post-World War I, heading towards the Holocaust, set the scene, here we go, and what do we get?
I think we get a really confused narrative, which is part thriller, part psychological drama, and part existentialist,
And
or
maybe a touch of horror movie.
just a touch. And I think those parts, if you look at them each separately, they can be good within their own genre. But when you kind of string all of them together, it just creates a bit of a mess of a film.
Yeah, I think that mess is a great way to describe it, because there are little hints of Bergman in this. From the first shot of the movie, we get a black and white image of faceless, nameless people walking through a crowd that is really disconnected from anything else at the moment. There's no explanation why it's not in color. Mm-hmm. And then we cut to a scene where David Carradine is heading into a house where downstairs there's a wedding party going on. Everyone is celebrating the beauties of life and of future, as Carradine heads upstairs to discover that his brother blew his brains out, basically, and nobody downstairs is of the knowledge of the calamity that's happening in the bedroom.
And it was a great shot, too. It was very arresting. He opens the door. You can't see his facial expression, but you know he's absolutely horrified. And all you see is the elongated and mutilated face of his brother, kind of like it reminded me of the painting of The Scream. You know, and it really sets the tone for how you anticipate the film will go. And then it sort of, bit by bit, loses that kind of tension and the potential.
And it's hard to pinpoint one exact reason why none of this comes together. I guess, for one, It's another English language production, and if you're looking at Bergman's track record, The Touch, there's not really a lot of evidence that English is his area of expertise when it comes to cinema. But there's also this weird disconnect between our two main actors, which I think is a disaster for any...
There's zero chemistry between them.
There's a scene where Carradine is sitting on one side of the screen and Liv Ullmann is sitting on the other side of the screen, and it's almost like these two actors are in different films. They're not connecting, they're not interacting, and it might have been intentional, but it certainly doesn't work as a viewer.
The other thing that really frustrated me about the characters is that I never really understood their motivation. Again, we have this trope of kind of the circus performers or the burlesque performers, but they lose their jobs and there's injuries and their troupe comes apart, and then the brother dies and he hooks up with Liv, who's his brother's ex-wife, and it just, their motivation for either being together or not being together is never really clear, and why they start up this weird relationship, why they're so codependent on each other. It's just bizarre, and it's never really laid out. It's just this continuous, monotonous desperation throughout the entire film.
And it seems to be the wrestle that Bergman always has with his scripts, is sometimes that lack of clarity is so properly organized that it makes a complete whole by the end of the film. But instead here, there's so much disconnect. None of it ever comes together. I have to blame part of this on Carradine's performance. Now, he was flown onto the set about like 2 days before the production started, so I can't fully blame him for this misunderstanding that seems to be on the screen. But as the character, he doesn't really bring any soul to it. If anything, he's an empty vessel, which maybe Bergman intended, but it's not clear as to why or how we should interpret that as viewers. Instead, we just kind of get this man floating throughout various scenes where he's being chased, where there's evil happening and we don't really know what it is. But I don't want to be too harsh on the film because there are some redeeming elements.
I think the trick is to kind of isolate those threads in the film that work continuously from the other pieces that if you put them all together, it's a bit messy. But if you look at them individually, they kind of work. For me, one of the things that I liked about the film that I think worked is the kind of continuous building of tension through elements of mystery. So there was constantly this air of something sinister and mysterious happening, and we didn't really know what it was. And we weren't quite sure whether the main character, played by David Carradine, was implicated in it somehow, or was just an innocent bystander that was going to be dragged into something. So until the big reveal at the end, which I think was a flop, up until that point, the mystery and suspense worked.
Yeah, there are some film noir elements that definitely create a foundation for this film that is tolerable, I would say. I liked them, but I also felt like they were entirely separate from the rest of the themes.
Another thing that I appreciated about the film was Bergman's attempt, which I thought was actually really brave, to somehow try to access the tragedy of the Holocaust and not make sense of it or not to kind of rationalize it in any sense of the way, but just to kind of access and bring it to the foreground and try to see some element of causality or predictability of it or how it could have possibly come to happen.
He sort of tries to capture fear in a bottle or something like that.
And for me, it's interesting that he tried to do that because he's in Germany, he's not German, and he's seeing this from the outside and trying to somehow recreate it in a way, or the precedent for it. And the characters that he uses in the film are also outsiders in German society. And so he tries to kind of take cut a swath of society or penetrate it almost voyeuristically to try to make sense of it through the eyes of these outsiders, which is a completely different perspective than if you were, let's say, a German national or a German-born Jew. And I think the power of that directorial decision is that it allows him to engage with the theme and with the meaning of it all, but still maintain distance. So it's brave, but kind of safe at the same time.
I think Bergman plays it most safe in the finale of this film, and it's probably its biggest fault. He literally leans on what I think is a Hollywood trope of the sort of James Bond-esque villain, this sort of evil German man who puffs on his cigarette. Well, he literally holds Carradine captive and explains his evil plan to Carradine before basically offing himself. And it just felt so dumb. It felt so obvious And it felt so unlike Bergman, and I don't understand why he went in this direction. I thought the idea of the serpent's egg, the title of the film, and the explanation that like, evil is, encapsulated in this shell, and you can see inside it. You know something is in there. It's going to burst. It's going to break. It's going to cause some sort of tragedy. But there's nothing you can really do about it. I love that idea. I loved how it worked in the themes of the film. But what was this stupidity at the finale? It left me feeling kind of hollow.
Bergman does struggle with the ending. I think it's evident. It didn't all come together for him, and he was trying to find this explanation or access some kind of greater truth with the project, I think. And he shows us elements of this which relates to earlier films and earlier tropes, like the archival elements, for example, this massive, massive underground collection of medical records. And then with the villain at the end showing David Carradine's character the experiments that he has on film to kind of back up his points and his claims to what he was trying to do. I think Bergman was trying to somehow have that captured footage, those captured records, as some kind of element of truth, of deeper recording of history that leads to, an explanation of the present and potentially future. But it didn't quite translate, it didn't come together.
Carradine's character serves as this ultimate witness of the experiments, but so what? What does it mean to the rest of the film? What does it relate to what Bergman has shown us?
He's all over the place. He focuses on things that are almost completely irrelevant, and they seem to stick through from the beginning of the film to the end. One of the things that drove me absolutely crazy in this film is the fact that David Carradine's character has this weird little earring. And I don't know why I noticed it, but after I noticed it, I was fixated on it throughout the entire film because it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't fit with the time, but apparently, the way Carradine put it, at least on the DVD commentary, was that he wore it to the set, it was his earring, it was his own, and Bergman liked it, so he told him to keep it. Now, I don't know the validity of that story, but it seems kind of ridiculous, as if Bergman didn't care about the film, but I think it really illustrates the disconnect between what maybe Bergman should have been paying attention to and what he was actually paying attention to with these huge sets. But I kind of want to give Bergman a break here a little bit. There were a lot of personal problems going on in his life, and I think he might have been sort of swept away by all of the opportunities that were presented to him at such an unfortunate time. Now, at first he didn't like this movie, or at least that's how the story goes, but Liv Ullmann says that when he screened it again, in the early 2000s, around then, he had changed his mind. He sort of warmed to the idea of the serpent's egg. And I'm curious what you think, if you think this is essential Bergman or not.
For me, no, it's not essential Bergman. I mean, it's noticeably different from things that he's done before, and for a really avid fan, maybe it could be a point of interest.
I'm going to have to agree with you. There's just so many little moments of goodness that could have become something that didn't. It's almost interesting to see Bergman fail in this way. It almost helped me understand where Bergman was in this period in his career.
Und kannst nicht lassen anzufassen, hinzufassen, dran zu fassen. Nimm die Pfoten weg, mein Sohn, ich kenn dich schon.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Breaking Down Bergman.
Be sure to subscribe to our channel and visit us on Facebook and leave us a comment about what you think of this film. I have a feeling a number of you might disagree with our interpretation, and I'd love to hear what you thought.
And we will see you next time on Breaking Down Bergman when we are looking at Autumn Sonata.